Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews out in San Francisco. Let me start tonight with this. Stand your ground. What's this law all about? Is it a statement that you don't have to avoid trouble? Is it a call to arms? And what part did it play in George Zimmerman's behavior that tragic night? Did it encourage him to pursue Trayvon Martin? Was it because he had a gun and he thought he had the law on his side? Isn't it a fair question that none of this would have happened if this person had been unarmed? Was there something in his thinking, Zimmerman's, about the law, something in the way he behaved when he went in pursuit of Martin that resulted from this law that says, stand your ground? Let's get to the next round in this debate, this public verdict on the Trayvon Martin tragedy, the battle over stand your ground. Perry Bacon's an MSNBC contributor and political editor with thegrio.com, and Radhika Jones is the assistant managing editor for Time Magazine. Radhika, thanks I'm sorry for that mispronunciation. Radhika, tell me about what you think is the reason why the Attorney General, Eric Holder, who is in a somewhat political position, but also primarily in a public service position, why he would be speaking, as he has come out of talking about the trial of George Zimmerman, begin to talk about stand your ground, the law in Florida.
Well, I think Eric Holder, of course, is in a unique position to talk about this. He comes from a personal perspective. He comes to it as the first African-American Attorney General. And he also obviously brings a legal perspective to it. When we started reporting on the stand your ground laws that are in the background of this case last year, when the case came to national prominence, we discovered that even some state attorneys in Florida who are employed to uphold this law have issues with it. And it seems to me that from that point forward, from the point when it became clear that there would be a trial, people have been paying attention to stand your ground laws. They've been becoming more informed about them, and it makes a lot of sense that Eric Holder would direct his attention there.
Well, I guess the question is, did the stand your ground law play a role in the jury room? Even though it was not mentioned much in the trial, one of the Zimmerman jurors, known as B37, says it played a role in the jury deliberations. In a statement to CNN, the juror says, quote, "My prayers are with all those who have the influence and power to modify the laws that left me with no verdict option other than not guilty in order to remain within the instructions." This juror also said the group had been split on a verdict in some of their discussions, with 3 jurors for acquittal, 2 for manslaughter, and 1 leaning towards second-degree murder. Other jurors have distanced themselves since then from juror B37. 4 of them put out a statement in response saying, "We ask you to remember that we are not public officials and we did not invite this type of attention into our lives. We also wish to point out that the opinions of juror B37 expressed on the Anderson Cooper show were her own and not in any way representative of the jurors listed below," and then the list of the 4 of them. So let me go to Perry Bacon on this, to you, and we'll go back and forth on this, the influence of that law, because it seems to me you've got to separate 2 things here. Focus on whether you believe the testimony of George Zimmerman, which was introduced through the police questioning of him, and that was taped of that, or you don't. If you do, was there an option here to leave the situation that he was involved in, that he's pinned down? Did he have the option to walk away? In other words, I'm not sure you can get clarity here from this jury yet. Were they thinking he was telling the truth, but he still had the option, even if he was telling the truth, to get away and avoid this situation? Or were they not believing him? And if they weren't believing him, why did they acquit him? This is what's inconsistent in the jury decision. If, what do you call it, stand your ground legislation really was influential here. I don't think it was, because if it was, we'd have some clarity here. My thought. What's yours?
I think you're right, Chris. My understanding is that the defense itself did not invoke stand your ground. And I know that Jeb Bush and some other Republicans, even at the time of the killing initially, said that stand your ground really didn't apply here. I think when you talk about the politics of it, though, one reason Eric Holder is talking about stand your ground laws is the administration would love to push some kind of broader proposals on getting rid of guns at a federal level, because we know Zimmerman having a gun was important here, and maybe he shouldn't have had a gun, but they haven't had no success passing any kind of gun control laws federally, as we know. So the part of the administration's view is that there are 22 states that have stand your ground laws, including Florida, New Hampshire, and 2 other states where Obama won in 2012. So there's probably some room potentially to get those laws repealed in those states, and I think that's why you're hearing Eric Holder talk about them.
Let me go back to Radhika on this question. Again, I want to get clarity here. What do you think was the relevance in your understanding of what happened in that jury room to the issue of stand your ground?
My understanding from listening to that juror testimony is that they really tried to isolate the moment of the struggle and the killing. And if stand your ground played a role at all, again, my understanding is that it may have been a sort of the emboldening backdrop to this struggle. But they seem to want to isolate that moment of violence away from what motivated George Zimmerman to get out of his car. And that is where you have a real gray area with this law.
Well, let me ask you about the self-defense part would have come in when he was believed, according to the jury's decision, he was in danger of losing his life or serious bodily injury. That wasn't when he left the car. His decision about using the gun came when, if you believe his testimony, when he was pinned down and being slammed into the sidewalk, if you believe his testimony. That's why I don't understand why this jury keeps saying there's an issue of law here, when by that definition, standard regular self-defense would have worked. Again, let me go back to Perry on that. I mean, I think we got a real problem of consistency here in this verdict.
The jurors have not been, they can decide on what they have not been very clear about their rationale. And I think that we'll probably never get a full picture of what all six of them thought. We're getting sort of one at a time speaking. And I guess we'll later on in a few weeks really know how much of a role stand your ground played versus their interpretation of what happened there versus what other people have talked to us about. I don't think we have a clear sense of what they exactly think happened yet.
Yeah, well, let's go to Attorney General Eric Holder. He has gone public now with a forceful denunciation of stand your ground laws. This is Holder, the Attorney General, speaking about the law at the NAACP's annual convention just yesterday.
It's time to question laws that senselessly expand the concept of self-defense and sow dangerous conflict in our neighborhoods. These laws try to fix something that was never broken. There has always been a legal defense for using deadly force and the if is important, if no safe retreat is available. It is our collective obligation. We must stand our ground.
Let me go to Perry and then Radhika. Both answer the same question. I know it's a tough one. Is this a smart political focus for the Attorney General? Because it does allow him to give deliberation to the question of bringing a civil rights case against Zimmerman, but in the meantime be active on this front while leaving the other question aside for a bit and maybe relinquishing the need for him to act on the other front if he acts aggressively on this stand your ground issue. Your thoughts, Perry?
I think that's exactly right, Chris. I think it's my understanding from legal experts is it will be pretty hard to prove the civil rights violation in this case. It's unlikely that the DOJ will move forward on that issue. So in that sense, Holder is taking the issue where he can. Holder doesn't have any power on state laws either. Let's be clear, he can't get a Florida stand your ground law repealed. But it is a good way for him. And also, I heard the White House today at the press briefing. They talked about this stand your ground idea as well, and to make a broader push to get rid of these laws. That's something they really can do. While my suspicion is eventually we'll see that the main legal recourse is through the Martin family filing a civil suit, not DOJ.
I'm with you on your thoughts on these three issues, I guess, including the civil case, the civil rights potential, and of course the stand your ground politicking, if you will. I
think Perry makes a good point, and there's a bigger picture here, which is that the stand your ground policies, like stop and frisk policies in New York, for example, and various other laws and policies, end up having a disproportionate effect on the African American community. Eric Holder is in a good position to talk about that, and whether he can directly influence those laws, and he can't, as Perry says, he can make people more attuned to them and to their consequences, and I think that's a valuable move.
But just to be careful here, I know we have to be nuanced here. I grew up in Philadelphia, and I keep track of how they do things out there. Michael Nutter won the Democratic primary for mayor by advocating stop and frisk and gaining his greatest support in the beginning in the African-American community on that issue. So the idea that the African-American community as a group is against stop and frisk wasn't held up. It didn't seem to be the case in Philly. Radhika? I
think that's true, but I think it's a community issue, and something that we're seeing as we report on this story this week is that churches and black communities and other non-political leaders are starting to think about the broader implications of this verdict and of attention to the Stand Your Ground law, and think how can we move forward from here to make our communities safer and lose fewer young black men to violence. So it's a much broader issue.
There are other reasons to stop and frisk besides our ethnicity, God help us. I hope there is, and it has to do with behavior, situations after a gang killing, all kinds of things that a good police officer can handle effectively. Anyway, thank you, Perry Bacon. Thank you, Radhika Jones. This is hot stuff.